Okay, so I want to welcome everyone for tonight's program. Thank you for joining us live. Tonight's program is the Joe Lyons Memorial Speaker Series on housing and homelessness, specifically Yes in My Backyard, delivering housing solutions. And we are joined by Jed Leano, who is the San Gabriel Valley Regional Housing Trust Chair and council member from City of Claremont. As well as Jill Shook, who is a co-founder of Making Housing and Community Happen. We are so lucky to have them tonight and looking forward to hearing from them a little bit later. But before we get into the program, I wanted to just kind of give a brief highlight. Some folks may ask, why a memorial program on behalf of Joe Lyons? What is the connection point to the Bonita Democratic Council? A lot of folks know his history in Claremont, and some may not know his history before Claremont. And so unfortunately, we did have the passing of him on December 8th of 2022. He did, in fact, serve 2 full terms on the Claremont City Council, where he passionately served as a representative on the Tri-City Mental Health Governing Board, the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments Homelessness Committee. But prior to all of that great work as a council member, he was an original charter member of Bonita Democratic Council back in 2005. And in fact, in 2008, he was encouraged by the then LA County Democratic Party Chair, Eric Bauman, to run for California State Senate in what we called the Red Zone District 29 against Bob Huff. He did in fact lose that election, but he earned over 126,000 votes and became the Democratic nominee for the next 4 years. And he took full advantage of that, getting more visible and more actively engaged at both the county and state level. He retired from the City of Hope in 2009, where he helped establish the Infectious Disease Research Laboratory starting back in 1983. As timing would have it, and with significant name recognition from his Senate race, he ran in an open seat for the City Council in Claremont and won. And again, I believe it was a blessing to Claremont and the region for him to be able to find his calling or to reconnect with his calling and passion for public service. And I'd like to think that Bonita Democratic Council had a little part in that. So that's a little bit of the why. And also for those that don't know, he is my dad. So he's my Papa Joe, and it is my pleasure and honor to honor his memory and all of his great work on behalf of Claremont and the broader region in his service to housing and homelessness. With that said, though, there are so many people that I've been fortunate to get to know that have shared an additional perspective and a life experience with Joe Lyons. And I invited Dr. Ann Turner to join us tonight for a special memorial testimony because when so many people heard of my dad's passing in December, they reached out to family members and reached out through social media to share their stories about Joe and his impact. Dr. Ann Turner has a significant resume of her own. I'm going to share a little bit of it, and then she's going to share a testimony of her experience with Joe Lyons. Dr. Ann Turner currently serves as the Director of Community Services for the City of Corona. And previously, she served 6 years as the Director of Human Services for the City of Claremont. And this is where she connected with Joe Lyons in their shared work to improve the homelessness issues in Claremont and the San Gabriel Valley. It is through that dedicated shared effort that they developed a friendship and a mutual respect for one another. I know my dad often said that very little could he accomplish without the support of a winning team and staff member. And oftentimes the name staff member meant Dr. Ann Turner. So, and her team of people that she brought along with her. They secured millions, $1.2 million for homeless services, and decreased significantly the number of unsheltered residents during their tenure together. They were a power team, a staff member, a high-level staff member, and an advocate on the dais. And so tonight, again, I asked Ann to provide a brief testimony of Joe, and I give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Matt. And just want to say what an honor it is to be here tonight and to be able to say a little bit about Joe. You know, as you were sort of reading that opening, I found myself just welling up. You know, I try to be more rational tonight and less emotional, but it would serve to say that my relationship with Joe Lyons changed the trajectory of my life. So when I came to the city of Claremont to work, Joe was the mayor, and they were the longest council meetings I had ever been to in my entire life. And, you know, the thing about it is that sometimes people talk for a really long time and you just tune them out. But when Joe spoke, you tuned in, because there was a deep empathy and a profound compassion that just resonated out of his whole being. You know, I always thought it was really interesting. Words are fun for me. And I think about Lyons being his last name, because to me, when I think of Joe, I think of a lion. You know, he was incredibly fierce. When everyone else dismissed the Occupy movement, Joe was deeply moved by it and changed by it. When people were outside of City Hall in Claremont, Joe did not walk by and just dismiss what he saw. He engaged and he saw people. He made you feel that his passion was contagious and you were with him on the front lines. We often talked about the power of advocacy. We talked about the power of speaking for those without a voice. And we would talk often about the image of people arm in arm walking across the bridge in Selma. And we would talk about what that meant to be empowered by community and by connection. And it was in Joe's language and it was in Joe's work that you felt you were arm in arm at the front lines of changing the world. He allowed you to know what it was like to ask for the best in people. And he asked over and over and over again. He asked them to look within themselves and show up as the very best that they could be, because we owe it to each other. We owe it to each other to have a community where we do take care of each other. He loved the concept of shared housing. I kept saying, Joe, it's a political loser. Like, shared housing is terribly, it's politically, it's going nowhere. And he would just say, it's the best. You know, we're all just going to open our homes and we're going to let everybody in. It's going to be great. I'm like, Joe, it's not feasible. And he said, but I can dream it, Ann. And he always could. He could dream it. And I wanted to make it happen for him. I would work so hard to make it happen for him. He loved the word collaborative. He loved consortium. he never had a meeting that didn't have the longest title in America, of which there could be no acronym. And so the mayor's ad hoc committee, collaborative committee for housing and homelessness was born from Joe Lyons. I mean, try to say that fast 3 times. But out of that committee came that $1.2 million, because Joe never really thought specifically about Claremont. He thought about this region. And he talked about the concept, if we house our own, if we house that person we know, the woman that sits next to us at church or temple, or the person that we see at the grocery store, if we take care of our own, if each of us takes care of our own, then we take care of homelessness throughout LA County. And he was amazing, the best fighter I ever knew, ever. I loved watching Joe fight. We would get in the train and we'd start talking on the way into a supervisor's meeting in LA. And by the time we hit the station, man, he was fired up and ready to go. He was marching down LA. There was gonna be no money in the city center. We were gonna get it out to the people, and they weren't gonna kill us from the ivory tower, because we were gonna power to the people. And I mean, I sat in an Uber with Joe Lyons. Our poor Uber driver thought he was crazy. He was in the back of the car going, power to the people. We're gonna house them all. And you know, with all of that, he never forgot me. The beauty of who he was is that my dad died 4 years ago, and Joe called me on every significant event in my life. When I got a new job, Joe called me to say how proud he was of me. He said, I'm going to be your surrogate dad, and I'm going to call you today, and I'm going to tell you your dad would be so proud of you today. And when I would get an award or a recognition, he would call and say, calling just to tell you, you're doing a great job, and I'm so proud of you. And all I can say tonight is that I am proud beyond words to be able to share just a little bit of the connection that I had with Joe. He was the nucleus, and from that, so many of us were born into this work of housing and homelessness. There is not a person in the San Gabriel Valley who's working in housing and homelessness now who wasn't touched by the power of Joe Lyons. Every single one of us. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my testimonial, and thank you, Matthew, for asking me to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Anne, for joining us tonight. And we're going to transition to our program and our program speakers. Again, we are so lucky to have 2 distinguished speakers with us tonight. I've already mentioned them previously. Jed Leano, Councilmember for City Claremont, Chair of the San Gabriel Valley Regional Housing Trust, will kick us off tonight. But before he does, while I have all of your attention, I just wanted to let you know that this will be a speaker series. And next month, we'll continue the conversation specifically in regards to affordable housing and community building services. So save the date, Thursday, March 9th, and the conversation will continue. Please bear with me as I transition our slideshow for Jed.
Matthew, while you're pulling up the slide deck, I'll just take the liberty of thanking Ann Turner for those beautiful, beautiful remarks. And before I get to the business that I have to do here, I'd just like to echo what she said, that there is now an entire movement of housing advocates. But before there were tenants unions, and before there was Inclusive Claremont, and before there was Housing Claremont, there was Joe. And so thank you to the Bonita Democratic Club for giving a forum to honor Joe's legacy. every time someone advocates for housing or advocates for housing people who are experiencing homelessness, it's the vocalization of Joe Lyons' legacy. So I'm proud to be a part of that. And before I start, I just want to recognize former Mayor of Claremont, Karen Rosenthal, and would like to thank Council Member friend San Dimas John Ebner for being here. And got to give a shout out to David Estrada, who is leader in NAMI, and thank you for being with us. And I'm proud to share the stage with Jill Shook, an esteemed colleague who I think does excellent and outstanding work. But I'm here to talk to you all tonight about the San Gabriel Valley Regional Housing Trust, because I want to share with you what we're doing in the region to try to expand opportunities for people experiencing homelessness and the impact that we're trying to make in the region on affordable housing. So Matt, if we could go to the next, let me just give you all a little primer and I'll just get right to the point. The San Gabriel Valley Regional Housing Trust is an agency comprised of 22, now 23 cities in the San Gabriel Valley. The 31 cities here, 23 are members. And we were started by SB 751, sponsored by Senator Susan Rubio. So why is that significant? Well, simply put, if you have, anyone can start a trust. You know, I can go hire a lawyer right now, we can form a trust. But if you want that trust to combine public and private dollars, then you actually have to pass legislation to do that. And so thank you to Senator Susan Rubio for being the catalyst in the creation of this trust. Can we have the next slide, please, Matt? So the trust is led by a group of regional leaders throughout the San Gabriel Valley. And it's a combination of elected officials, as you could see here, the roster of electeds that we have. The Regional Housing Trust was broken up into groups of cities, and within each little group or pairing of cities, there's an elected leader. We also have some housing experts like Benita DeFrank from the city of Pomona, Carol Averill, who's been working in the city government and housing space for a long time. And one thing I want to say about this board of directors that's really, really important is that we come from a wide range of political backgrounds, political preferences, political ideologies. Okay. And housing is no doubt one of those places where those differences are on full display. But the one thing I'll say is that at the Housing Trust, we check those differences at the door. We are here to serve one collective objective, and that is to build affordable housing in the San Gabriel Valley. So you can see folks from all sorts of different parts of the region, different political parties, different ideologies, but we all have one common goal in mind. Can I have the next slide, please? So just, you know, if you ever see one of these folks, tell them thanks for collaborating. The Housing Trust was funded in 2020 for the first time, and we received earmark money in 2020, 21, and 22, and 2022 and 23. And I just want to share with you that in that time, we've been able to finance over 500 units of permanent supportive housing and 3 separate projects of interim bridge housing. And I'll show what those are later. But we've divided those projects and programs into different pots and pools. And the reason we've done that is because we don't want to just finance capital projects. We want to pursue innovation, and we want to be involved in every step of the process of housing creation. Next slide, please. So I'll go over what those steps are next so that we can talk collaboratively about how to get that done. So our bread and butter of what we do at the Housing Trust is we fund housing units. So we fund projects, and our objective, our goal is to get projects over the finish line. We very rarely are involved with projects that are at the beginning stages when we fund them through our pipeline. Usually what we do is we evaluate projects, and they're mostly permanent supportive housing projects. For those of you who don't know what that definition is, that's income restricted housing, usually for people experiencing homelessness or at risk of being homeless, with wraparound services. So it has some component of an operationally funded program that assists people to stay housed. And so our projects, we fund different projects, but we usually have 2 main metrics that we want to serve. Number one, we want to help the poorest of the poor. So we want to help as many people as possible who have the most difficulty paying for housing. But number two, we want to get projects funded that are ready to go. So how many people are you helping that are extremely low income? And how close are you to getting finished? Those to us are the North Star of what we believe should be funded right away. Next slide, please. And so this right here is a list of the projects that we have funded. And you know, what I'm really happy about this list of projects that we funded is that they're spread all throughout the region, north, south, east, and west. And you have projects that have as many as 125 units permanent supportive housing, and you got projects that have 15 units. You know, so we have really big projects that are 5 stories tall. We have really small projects that are bungalows, and we're not here to decide which is better, what's better. If it pencils out, if it helps people who are poor, and if it's ready to go right now and shovel ready, we want to help fund it. So let me just do some math with you, though. We have 31 cities in the San Gabriel Valley, 23 are member agencies. And so these are the list of projects that we've funded. You know, as a leader of the agency, I got to get projects funded, but I also have the goal of bringing more parties to the table. I have to tell people that we have these resources, and I got to encourage communities to get on this list, come up with ideas, and how do we include your community as one of the funded agencies to build some permanent supportive housing. Next slide, please. One of the things that we are really proud of is that every project that comes through our pipeline, architecturally, they're just beautiful. They're stunning. They're gorgeous. And we really believe that really good, creative, and beautiful design is critical, not only to just quality construction, but it's also huge for political support. It's huge to be able to go to the community and win public support by saying, look at this beautiful asset that we're going to bring to your community. And we hope that anytime you see a project funded by the Housing Trust, that's how you feel about it. Because certainly as a board, when we see the projects, that's how we feel about them. Next slide, please. And so not only are we funding projects that are in the list and pipeline of being ready for construction, sometimes there are projects that are still a long way off. They're not going to happen this year. They're not going to happen this month. But where they are is a developer or a city or a county agency. They want to acquire some land and they want to get the process going. But you know, one of the worst things about housing is that to get going, it requires a lot of technical reporting. You got to do 1 billion studies. You got to do 1 billion analyses. And maybe by the time that you've done 5 or 6 of these studies, the land cost may have gone up 25%. It may have gone up 33%. Now the project's infeasible. You had a project budget, and now that project's totally blown up. Why? Because in the process of doing the technical components, one of the things, the most expensive cost that you have, may have totally changed. So we create a thing called the revolving loan fund. It is functionally a no-interest loan. And for a project that's going to get developed that we know we'll be able to support from the Housing Trust, what we want to do is give the funds to secure and lock in that land price. And so if you're going to go do some studies, you got to do some engineering, traffic, you name it, environmental reports. We want that land price locked in now so that we can keep and control the cost down. And then when people get whatever funding sources come in for the capital stack, when that money comes back, they pay the loan. Now we can pass that forward, and then we can pass it forward again. Next slide, please. One of the things that we have done is we've gotten involved in 3 interim housing sites. And so I talked about permanent supportive housing, which are permanent structures. They usually have income requirement deeds for 55 years. That means that in order to receive that funding, they have to be rented or sold at below market rate for a long period of time, excess of half a century. Sometimes folks are not ready for placement in permanent supportive housing. Some folks, they're dealing with some issues. And sometimes dealing with those issues means that they need a temporary place to stay while they can work on whatever those issues are. And at some point in the future, they'll be ready to move on to permanent supportive housing. And so for that reason, we got involved with cities of Baldwin Park and Montebello to help come up with interim housing sites. These are not permanent supportive housing. They're not deed restricted units for 55 years. They're all tiny home sites. They're all modular construction, which really keeps costs down. And the goal was to allow these sites to give people some immediate relief and some urgent humanitarian help, have a place to stay, have a roof, and try to stabilize their lives while we try to move them on to permanent supportive housing. Next slide, please. So these are some renderings, and the top two sites, Montebello and Baldwin Park, these are pallet homes for individuals. The bottom site, Serenity Homes in Baldwin Park, you'll see that the units are a little bit wider, and these are all one story. You'll see they're a little bit wider. The Serenity Homes in Baldwin Park is specifically for families experiencing homelessness. So it does have a bedroom unit, and it is intended for a family unit with some more space inside. Next slide, please. We also want to not only fund permanent supportive housing, finance interim housing, help secure land prices to keep costs down in projects. We also want to be the agency that spurs innovation. So we want to be the group where if you have an idea and it's never been done before, we want to help you develop that idea. So maybe you don't have a plan yet. Maybe you don't have a site. Maybe you don't have studies done on the feasibility, the environmental impact, structural engineering, but you've got an idea maybe of turning an old commercial or transit corridor, some other use besides residential. If you want to get creative with ideas, we want to finance the development of those ideas. We want to help people get to a place where they can pursue innovation and turn those ideas into a reality. So we're able to help finance the development of either architectural drawings or engineering feasibility of any sort of new innovation project. Next slide, please. And finally, one of the things that we've got to just get real with is you don't plan housing, you don't build housing, frankly, without some basic studies. And unfortunately, one of the things that has to happen every time you start a housing development, there's an inordinate amount of study that has to happen. It's a very academic exercise. And so we want to help finance that. We want to help people survey their land. We want cities to be able to determine what are good sites for this. We want to determine where can we help issue bonds? Where can we help with real estate acquisition? Where can we help with public outreach and engagement? And also, how can we help leverage other dollars? We want to deliver all those other options. And sometimes the only way to do that is through helping secure the services necessary to analyze these questions. And so I think this is my last slide coming up here. And what you see from funding innovation, funding ideas, and then helping secure financing, issuing loans to help people get, help people lock in land prices, but then finally helping finance construction, capital costs, from the idea stage to the land stage to the construction stage. We believe the Housing Trust can be your partner from beginning, middle to end, and we'd love to help. So that's why we go on this roadshow. And so I think that's the last slide for me, Matt, but I just want to say that, you know, we don't do one thing. We don't just say, this is what we're looking for, and we only help when you're in this one place. We want to be the agency that can help you beginning, when you just got an idea, middle, when you want to buy some land, or at the end, when you're ready to finance some construction, because that's really the only way we're going to make this happen. And I just want to say finally, what's beautiful about this agency is that we don't sit there and say, these are Pomona units, these are El Monte units, these are Claremont units. In the San Gabriel Valley, these are our units. Homelessness doesn't have boundaries. There's not my homelessness, your homeless people. There are people, and we got to house them wherever we can house them. And so I want to be a resource for all of you who are motivated, but I want my agency to be a partner, and let's try to work on solutions together. So that's what I got to say. Thank you all for listening, and I hope the Housing Trust gets a phone call from one of you tomorrow saying, hey, we got this great idea. We want to help.
Hey, thank you so much, Jed. I will get Jill's presentation queued up. But before I do that, allow me to go back and share a brief bio on Jed, and also a brief bio on Jill, because both of these bios are impressive. And clearly, I cut them down quite a bit for the purpose of saving a little bit of time, because I think most people are more interested in the presentations. But in regards to Jed, Jed is serving his second term on the Claremont City Council. He was reelected and will be serving a term from 2022 to 2026, his current term. Prior to his election to City Council, Councilmember Lyons served as the vice chair of the Community and Human Services Commission, and was the founding chair of Housing Claremont. In addition to serving on the City Council, he serves as chair of the Regional Housing Trust, as I've mentioned, chair of the Tri-City Mental Health Board, and he's also Claremont's representative to the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments Homelessness Committee. He represents the San Gabriel Valley COG on the SCAG, or Southern California Association of Governments Community, Economic, and Human Development Committee. That's quite a mouthful. And that's charged with the regional housing needs assessment methodology. In October 2019, he was named Democrat of the Year for the 41st Assembly District by the LA County Democratic Party, and he serves as the vice chair of the Filipino American Democratic Caucus of the California Democratic Party. With Jill, please allow me to share a brief bio for her. Since 2000, Jill has advocated for stable, decent, affordable homes to enable people to stay rooted in a community. In 2001, she was part of crafting an inclusionary policy, producing 590 affordable units as no cost to the city, with 488 units more leveraged with inclusionary fees. Pasadena is the only city in LA County where the homeless count has dropped by 56% between 2011 and 2020, in part due to the beloved community of collaborators in Pasadena. Jill is a co-founder with her husband of Making Housing and Community Happen. She is author and editor of Making Housing Happen, Faith-Based Affordable Housing Models. And that book is used on campuses across the US, and she does housing justice workshops and institutes around the US. And allow me to queue up her presentation, but
so Matthew, I think, shortly. Do you mind if I just do a share? And
sure.
That way I can control it. Yeah, thanks. I think you just need to make it so I can share. Just click the multiple participants can share. Under the share, the green share screen.
Will that work?
Not yet. Oh yes, maybe so. Thank you. There's other ways to make it happen. So let me do this full screen. Get this out of the way. There we go. Okay, here we are. It's such a joy to be here, and I so loved hearing the testimony about your father, Matthew. Thank you for that beautiful presentation, and it's always a joy to hear Jed and his beautiful work. So here we go. Make sure this can advance, hopefully. So I'm just going to give you a really brief overview of what our organization, Making Housing and Community Happen, does. From the kind of the looking from the sky down, we have a very small staff, just 5 part-time, and we have tons of volunteers and 4 different teams. The one-day Housing Justice Institutes we've done around the country, and we're doing a lot of work on the housing element. So My first slide is talking specifically about the housing element in San Dimas. Initially, we'll look at it briefly in Laverne. So all housing ultimately is local. It all needs to be approved through local city councils, through planning commissions. And so it's important that you look specifically at the cities in the jurisdiction where you're serving. So with about 35,000 population compared to what we have here in Pasadena, about 140, there's very few homeless, thankfully. Only 10 to 20 unhoused in the city of San Dimas. I don't know how recent that stat is, but you are required to plan for, not necessarily build, but plan for 1,248 new housing units, with at least 810 of those being affordable, all that done within the next 7 years. And some of the ways that the city of San Dimas is looking to do that is by encouraging more ADUs, by seeking to preserve a mobile home accord, essentially preventing the park owners from increasing their rents too high, and that might cause displacement, seeking to preserve existing affordable units. Sadly, one development in San Dimas has already gone market rate. There's one more at risk in another year. And so that's an opportunity for some advocacy there. They say that the city is built out with little usable land. You know, I always hear city council members say this, but that usually just means they're not willing to build up. And there's always airspace. There's always opportunities to change the skyline a little, but where it's appropriate. So the inclusionary is something the city is considering. We were able to get the inclusionary passed, as Matthew shared in the introduction. But as you may know, you cannot do inclusionary if there's not enough density. It has to have enough units to make it meaningful. Otherwise, it will not attract developers, and it will be somewhat meaningless to have inclusionary. The history admitted to redlining, which I thought was really impressive. And so I just really appreciate about that they actually included that. If you want to take a look in more depth, I would suggest looking at the housing element. It's really a fascinating read. I hope all of you do that if you haven't already. In terms of Laverne, what they're doing to deliver housing solutions, similar population as San Dimas, and a similar housing count. That was clear back in 2020, so it may be more now. They need to also plan for a similar number of new housing units, and with 653 of those affordable for the very lower income levels. So they're doing that in a similar way by encouraging ADUs, by seeking to preserve rent control, which I was very pleased to see that Laverne does have rent control, and seeking to preserve their condo conversion ordinance. And that's something that's I've tried to work for in Pasadena that we do not have. And I'm just pleased to see they even have that in Laverne. They also say the city is built out with little usable vacant land. And so again, there's opportunities there to try to increase density in the city center. And I'm going to talk to you briefly about some ways to do that. This is an idea that I learned about that I think could work in these two cities and throughout San Gabriel Valley, where you have cities with very few, a very low homeless count. You could actually end homelessness, and it wouldn't be that difficult. There are, if you were to take a single family home and build an ADU in the backyard and then also an internal ADU, if the city was to purchase this and set it aside as all permanent supportive housing, as Jed suggested, that would be an opportunity for just 3 people, or maybe 4 if it's a shared housing idea like Joe Lyons loved. And so this is a great model. We are doing this in Pasadena, and it's absolutely working. So you could always talk to our city and see how we made this happen. And the city is purchasing the home and doing this. We have a safe parking site, and that's part of our 4 teams. There's 15,000 people living in their vehicles in LA County. I'm sure there are some in your cities. And as of April 1st, we now have the first safe parking program in all of San Gabriel Valley that we've been able to initiate and make happen. We only have 5 safe parking places where people can park. It's at a church, a Lutheran church. They have access to a bathroom, case management, vehicle repair assistance, mental health treatment, referrals. So it's a great opportunity for to serve the least of these through such programs. There are several other direct service programs that I would highly recommend that churches and smaller groups can do. Our Congregational Land Committee is doing amazing things. So we consult with congregations to build affordable housing on their underutilized land. It's better stewardship of the land, and it's just helping churches that are struggling as well to have neighbors and get some payments for their long-term ground lease, which also helps the church, but really helps the community and their neighborhood. We're now working, there's over 70 congregations that have come to us with essentially no advertising. We completed 2 educational cohorts with about 12 churches and congregations of different stripes in those cohorts, as they're learning and beginning to go down this path of what it takes to have housing on their property. We've worked with about 15 different more in-depth congregations. We spend between 15 to 30,000 per congregation. One example is in Laguna Beach. The church there is going to be having 84 units, the first time the city's built any affordable housing since 2005. I won't take time now to go over in more detail our process of how we actually work with congregations to do this feasibility, unless there's questions more about this later. But what I do want to say is that we're on target for the goals to plan 500 units of units on religious property this year. We are also beginning teams doing similar work in Washington State, Denver, Texas, Northern Cal, and possibly Oregon. So but there's a number of congregations that would love to do this, but they don't have the right zoning. And so it's important that if you're going to use tax credits, you need at least 50 units on a site to make it feasible. And so we have been initiating what we call religious overlay zones. We have urban planners on our team, and they've been contracting with cities. Sierra Madre has completed a stellar religious overlay zone. Passing it in Pasadena was not easy. I'll tell you about that in a second. But we're also realizing that it's going to be hard to go city by city. So we're looking at SB4, and we hope all of you will support it. It is giving an opportunity for any congregation in the state or even state colleges to have housing on their property to get the right zoning. One other team that we have is called the Affordable Supportive Housing Advocates. And so I want to tell you briefly about some of our major victories. We mentioned the inclusionary that's produced over 1,000 units, both through their in lieu fees and putting those to work and the actual units built. Through our, we have 69 units plus another 65, so 134 units of permanent supported housing that'll be completed this year. And so that's 134 chronically homeless people that are going to be housed in our city. These did not just happen. It took prayer vigils, and there's another 106 units. We had prayer vigils by different congregations every week, every Monday, and then they went to the city council and testified after our vigil. And then we've got rent control passed this year in our coalition, and we've started a community land trust, and that is a separate nonprofit doing some amazing work. And my husband and I will be putting our home into that trust. And we hope there's many other people that will get a vision for that. We have a team called the North Fair Oaks Empowerment Team. This is more of a community development approach to transformation. And our goal is to beautify but not gentrify. As you know, when you bring beautiful homes, sometimes it can also raise the price. And when you improve a neighborhood, we're looking at signage, more trees, sidewalk repairs, affordable housing, and complete streets. We have a complete street redesign to slow traffic, and the city is now writing grants to get that done. So we have a network of congregations right now, about 20 churches in our network, and it's essential that we have an army of people to show up at city council meetings, because there is actually no law that requires affordable housing unless you have inclusionary in your city, and it's required. So it all has to be advocated for. And so we're grateful for our organizer and our staff has been able to pull together all these congregations to partner with us. We've had 29 congregations that participated in our zoning amendment for the religious zoning. That equaled 170 people that offered 400 hours advocating just to get that one policy passed. But we finally got it passed. Amazing. So I'm going to end this slide, and then I think after this is one more. So we do our one-day Housing Justice Institutes. We were able to do one recently in Arcadia, and that has left in place a housing justice group that's continuing the work there. We did one also last year in Bellflower. We've done one in the past. This is the picture here is at a church in Monrovia. And also we've done one in Temple City. So wherever we've gone, we've left a team of advocates continuing the work, which has been very exciting. You might want to watch that little 7-minute or 6-minute video that's professionally done about our institutes, and consider that for your city. So if you want to learn more about our work, we do have a weekly update about all the work our teams are doing. And you can just go to the bottom of any of our page on our website and sign up. We have a monthly housing justice forum via Zoom, similar to what you're doing tonight. That's typically the 4th Tuesday of every month. This month, the focus is on rent control. There's a lot of landlords in our city that don't necessarily know it's in effect. And they need to know that it's a rent rollback, clear back to the 17th of May from 2021. And then next month, we're going to be looking at housing bills, different state housing bills. So contact me if you're interested in having a speaker from our team, and if you're interested in a one-day institute, and if you know any congregation interested in having the kind of feasibility and free feasibilities and service, we're happy to work with them and help them go down that path so they're equipped, they know what they're doing and not taken advantage of. So thank you for the opportunity to share. It's great to be with you guys. I get a little nervous, sorry.
No, thank you so much, Jill. That was a powerful presentation, and you are truly delivering housing solutions in Pasadena and inspiring others to do just that in their neighborhoods. So we've had the conversation, and again, I think that the hope is that we turn conversation into action. And I'm going to kick off the Q&A portion with that question is, you've inspired us. We've had the conversation. How best can we be citizen advocates in our cities to advance housing solutions that we discussed tonight? I know Jed sits on the dais and is on the receiving end of those oftentimes citizen advocacy efforts. And Jill, you've been actively part of campaigns in your city. If you could give us some top recommendations on how we can be the best possible citizen advocates in regards to delivering housing solutions. And we'll start with Jed.
Thank you, Matt. That's an outstanding question. And, I was speaking yesterday at the San Gabriel Valley Consortium on Homelessness Housing Summit, and that's the number one thing people want to know. I believe in helping create housing. What do we do? I'm not a developer. I'm not a landowner. So what can my role be in this? And I want to share with you that so much of Jill's work, everything that she just talked about, all the programs that they were advocating for, all of that is at a local level. And to arrive at a place where we can meaningfully propose and achieve policy, a lot of that work is political. And so I think that there's a lot that all of you can do. Number one is find a project locally that you believe in. Find a project that you believe in and let your council know that you support it. We are in a very different political time now. It is not scary or bad or difficult to say that you support housing. In fact, it's pretty widely accepted that we need to do this now. And so the first thing is that find a project you love and help support it. But those projects that we keep talking about, they're not going to come to fruition, and no one's going to champion them unless we have local elected leaders who will take up the cause of housing. So the next time in your town there's a city council election, the first thing you have to ask is, what's your position on housing? And when you find people who believe in that, support them. Make calls from them, chip into their campaigns. A lot of these things that we're talking about, they're policy, and Jill and I are describing it from a programmatic level. How do we accomplish it? But they're not going to happen without votes. And so we got to elect folks who believe in this. And tides have turned, and there's a lot of support for this now.
Yeah, I would really agree with everything that Jed just said. And I feel like it's one of the highest compliments that I've received is what some of the city council members have said about our team. They say that they love how we advocate because we're so respectful, but we're also very educational. We do not work in individuals. Typically, we vet everything we talk about in the city council within a team. And we discuss what's the best practice, what are all the talking points, what are the things we need to research, so that when we go, we're really prepared and respectful and able to give added value to our city council members, things that they may not have known, and they really appreciate it. And so they will not take the risk without knowing there's enough constituents that will stand with them. They really need that encouragement and that courage that we give to them. So advocacy is key in everything. So excellent question. Work in teams, know what you're talking about, be united in what you're saying, and look at it from all angles and make sure you cover. We meet one-on-one with our city council members. We ask them what their thoughts are on each policy. We want to get their take, and then we go back to the table and we figure out, okay, this is their take on it. How can we adjust what we say based on their concerns and what they have to say? And then we'll rewrite it, and then we'll go back again until finally we win. We never give up. And we've won every campaign we've asked for.
Thank you for sharing your insights. I'm going to ask one more question, but I am going to open it up to the group. So if you are wanting to ask a question, please raise your hand, or you can ask it in the chat if you're more comfortable doing so. My second question is, there tends to be, for lack of a better term, a love-hate relationship between local and state, and local control versus state overreach. There's been a lot of state pieces of legislation in the recent years to address the housing crisis. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, over the more recent years, what has the state gotten right when it comes to legislative solutions, and where do we where did the state miss the mark? If you'd be so kind to share your insight, and I can start with Jed.
That's a really good question, Matthew, and I want to point out that this is something that when you're a local elected official, you invariably end up having to weigh in on this question, and people are used to coming to city council meetings, and they are used to an entitlement process and a procedural system that simply doesn't exist anymore, frankly. I mean, a lot of the permanent supportive housing projects that you saw that were financed by the Regional Housing Trust, they're entitled. They have the legal ability, and so I don't want to be too wonky here. Entitlements means that they have the legal capacity to build housing there, right? They were given legal permission to use that land for that specific purpose. And so obviously the ramping up of streamlining is a critical source of streamlining process, because one thing that is really misunderstood about housing is that there's two really important pieces to this formula: cost and time. And oftentimes increasing the amount of time something takes coincidentally also increases the cost. So you make projects more expensive when you throw in more delays and you throw in more administrative and bureaucratic processes that really should be more streamlined. When you talk to any developing agency, whether they develop affordable housing and they're a nonprofit, or if they're a for-profit developer and they develop even things like commercial uses, adding unnecessary delays increases time. So I think that attempts to streamline entitlements and process is frankly necessary, because we're in a crisis. When you are in a crisis, you act appropriately to resolve that crisis with a sense of urgency that the law and policy demands. One of the things that we don't get right, and it's obviously going to take a much heavier lift than what we do at the Regional Housing Trust, is that financing of affordable housing is extremely complicated. And the reason why housing financing is so complicated is because the money is in so many different places. And with every pot of money that's in a different place, every place has different rules. So you have a project and you want to I'm just going to make up numbers. This is in its place. I'm just making up numbers. You want to do a 45 unit development for people who are very low income, right? And you want it to be, let's make up a target population. Let's say you want to do it for veterans, okay? You have to go to low income housing tax credit, that's TCAC, Tax Credit Allocation Committee. You probably would go to the County of LA. You'd probably go to some joint powers authority like the Regional Housing Trust. You'd probably go to some behavioral health agency like either LA County DMH, that's LA County Department of Mental Health, or Tri-City Mental Health, which is the mental health agency for Mona, Laverne, and Claremont. You'd go to different pots of money, but every place you go, they have totally separate and different rules. So it doesn't make sense. And so you're literally having to redress, redraw, redesign, reconfigure, and that changes with every place you go. And so not only is it administratively burdensome, and then that administrative burden increases costs, but it just doesn't make sense logistically. We should be trying to consolidate where the funding is, but then also that way we can streamline the eligibility categories. That's something that has been missed and that needs to be worked on.
Jill? Funding is huge in affordable housing. And so thank you for that, Jed. I'm going to mention two things. One that doesn't require city funding, and that's ADUs. We worked, our ADU committee that we've now put to bed was started in 2003. And we fought and we fought and we researched and we fought the good fight with good tools. We created what we called a comparative analysis. We actually went out into the community. We had an intern from Fuller Seminary who was also a realtor, and so he had access to the MLS, and he was able to determine how many ADUs were in our city. He counted 740 ADUs that were legal. And so that was a gold. Our city had never done that research. And so we took a street in the southern part of Pasadena that had like 90 ADUs, the next street had none. We found similar streets in East Pasadena and another one in Northwest Pasadena. We actually went out, we did our own traffic studies. They kept screaming and saying it's going to bring, you know, horrible urination in the street. It's going to bring traffic. It's going to, every horrible thing would happen because of having ADUs. And so we wanted to dispel every one of those. So in all of these streets where we compared one street to the next, traffic was never the issue. Parking was not an issue. We studied the parking. We went during high periods of time of the day when there was a lot of traffic and parking. It was just not an issue. We found that it had no effect on property values or crime. We studied all of this. And so we presented all this information to the city, and they was just like, they ignored it, completely ignored it. And so we thought, well, you know what? We're not getting anywhere in the city. We're going to go to the state. So we talked to Wachowski, and he asked me, he said, okay, what's the policy in Pasadena? Why is this so difficult? I explained all the details to him, and he said, okay, I'm going to pass a state law that's going to prevent Pasadena from ever getting away with this again. And I said, yay, finally, you know. We had to go to the state to make traction on this. And so they started passing great policies. Everything we advocated for with him got passed and is now in place, not just in our city, but statewide. And so our city today is so proud of our ADUs. They feel so excited that it's legal. We've won an award, a national award for the only affordable ADU program in the country that's working and effective. So everything turned around, but they fought it like crazy initially, obviously. And then one thing I want to mention that they need to change at the state level, and this is tragic. So I started off sharing with you all about the housing element and how important that is. You've got to know that document, and you've got to weigh in and help shape that. To my knowledge, in both the cities I mentioned, it's not fully approved. You still have an opportunity to weigh in. And so, because so many cities are out of compliance with the state in terms of their housing elements, they haven't yet got a housing element that will do something and that will that can be certified by the state. That means that cities are now under what's called builder's remedy. And so that means they have lost their local control. Right now in many of these cities in San Gabriel Valley, if there was some developer that wanted to come in and propose some high rise, they could probably do it. And so this really puts a lot of pressure on cities, like they better get their housing element passed, you know? And so in that sense, that's good. That's good local pressure to finally get the cities to do the right thing. But the one thing that dramatically needs to change, because cities don't have approved housing elements, they can't get affordable dollars. They don't have access to get any money from the state because they don't have an approved. We have projects ready in Pasadena that cannot get funded because we do not yet have an approved housing element. So we need a state policy that changes that, makes it possible for cities to still get affordable dollars, even though they don't have an approved housing element. We feel like the builder's remedy is enough penalty in itself to push cities to go the right thing. We don't need to withdraw affordable dollars.
Thank you for that. So I do see 3 hands raised. I think the way I saw it was we have Debbie, Falente, and David. Given the time of the night, that will probably be the remaining Q&A, and then we'll allow for closing from the speakers. So we'll start with Debbie Evans.
Hi there, Jed. I have a question for you. Does the city of Claremont have any kind of trust to where someone can set up their trust to donate to the unhoused projects that we have in the city?
What we have, the dedicated funding that we have that goes for affordable housing is the redevelopment agency successor housing funds. So just to kind of go backwards, when redevelopment agencies were dissolved in California, oftentimes cities had pools of funding there, and the pool of funding remains there. And the only eligible use for it that you can use for it is to develop affordable housing for people who are either low or moderate income or who are at imminent risk of or are currently unhoused. And so that money, that it can only be used for that. We utilize that money to prevent no-fault evictions before the implementation of AB 1482. We leverage that money to go directly into some COVID relief for people who were having trouble paying rent. And in addition to that specific funding, we're also chartered. We're also members from the very first year of the Regional Housing Trust. And so all of our small dollar allocations that we receive from either SB2 or other small sources, we pool those because, so SB2 is like a permanent source of planning dollars for affordable housing. Our SB2 money in the last fiscal year was $130,000. And so when I found out we got $130,000, I said, hey, y'all, this is great. Like, thanks for our 4 parking spots. So, like, we can't do anything with that. But if everybody at the trust puts together their $130,000, we can leverage millions of dollars to help complete a permanent supportive housing project. So I hope that answers your question. We do have the successor agency funds that are left over from the redevelopment agency that are only allowed to be used for that. But then we also use the balance for housing trust. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so next we have Falente.
Hi, thank you. More of just a kudos to Jill and Anthony. Their tenacity on working through the process, which was very difficult, regarding the housing on church property, was years, years. And even though I'm on the mayor's housing task force, I would tell you there was no, from staff, and Jill knows this, there was no real desire to make that happen. But she and others, but in particular, they would not let it go, and primarily pushed and was able to get that done. And the pastors are very, very happy. I'm part of the CCC, and I'll tell you, some of those churches were going to go bankrupt, quite frankly, had this not occurred. And now they will be able to assist not only some of their church members who are just one step up from being homeless themselves, but others. So I just wanted to give Jill and Anthony. We can't forget about Anthony. He works right alongside of Jill. I want to give them kudos.
Thank you, Falente. That's very kind of you.
And David, did you still have a question?
Well, listen, I just wanted to make a comment, and I wanted to thank Jill and Jed for the presentation. Jill, I had planned on reaching out to Jed first because he's an old friend and he had some really good information. But you actually filled in a lot of the questions that I had, and it just doesn't make any sense that my city should have any homeless at all, given the numbers that you shared with us. So I see that my friend John Ebener is working on that, and I appreciate that, and I'll be reaching out to him as well. But I want to thank you both for that. I do belong to a number of advocacy groups here in the San Gabriel Valley, and I don't think they know the information that you just shared with us, and I hope I get an opportunity to invite you to meet with them as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, glad to do that.
Okay, so we'll allow you to both to close. We can start with Jed if you have a few closing statements.
I'll be very brief. I just want to thank all of you for being interested in this topic. And I want to just tell you that the next time your city council meeting happens, even if there's not a housing agenda item, even if there's not something that the council is voting on, to hear, hi, city council, we really hope that you'll support the production of affordable housing in our community. It's badly needed. And to regularly pound away at that message really helps reinforce that it's a policy priority. And, we passed Measure H in 2017, and Measure H was supposed to produce $360 million a year. And the last financial year, the supervisors approved the budget, it was almost $500 million. It was almost $500 million. And sometimes there's frustration. Why is it that we're spending $500 million on homelessness, but the amount of people who are unsheltered continues to rise? Well, I'll give you some numbers on that. In the last year that there was a homeless count, over 22,000 people were placed into housing by the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. But more than 36,000 new people became homeless. And that's because we're playing a game of musical chairs. When you don't produce enough housing units, the people who are on the bottom levels of income, it is a mathematical fact that somebody will not have a place to live. And so obviously we are at a critical stage right now. Measure H will be back up it was a 10-year sales tax. It'll be back up in a couple of years. And people are going to want to know, what did it go toward? Obviously, we're deploying permanent supportive housing services to connect people with housing. But the fact is that when we don't build enough housing, period, you can deploy $500 million a year. You can deploy $3.5 million a year. And if the amount of housing units is inadequate for the growing population and economic growth, you simply will have increases in homelessness, and that's what we have. So we're not going to get to a place where those numbers are manageable until there's adequate housing and housing in abundance. So I hope y'all will get on the podium at next public comment and say, come on, y'all, let's build some affordable housing.
Yeah, I think I want to close out with a couple thoughts here, and how we typically think of density as a bad thing, and it actually is incredibly environmental. Single family homes are unsustainable. It doesn't justify buses. It doesn't justify all the money. Cities are being drained of funds because of single family homes. There's been all kinds of research showing that the spreading out of city services so broadly is not good for cities financially. And so we really need to rethink and be okay with part of the city going up. And we have an educational piece on each of our weekly updates showing all this research. And so it's really important that we get used to maybe imagining our cities a little different. Our youth want to have own homes, but they probably will be in condos, you know, and so we need to think through density in a new way and embrace it with joy and not resist it. The other thing I want to mention has to do with racial justice. And so the 710 in Pasadena has been returned, thankfully, for freeway fighters from South Pasadena cities that have been fighting it for years to keep that 710 from going through. And so through their city. And so this is a huge benefit to our city. There'll be 52 acres that will be returned, that were taken primarily by people of color, taken from people of color to build that freeway. And so thankfully our city's looking at the idea of restorative justice. And so I love that. We might call it reparations. We're not afraid of that word. But it's essentially the same thing. How do you restore and repair what was once there? And so I think you cannot separate housing from racial justice. This underlies almost everything we do. Our North Fair Oaks empowerment team is happening. That community development aspect is because that's a 10 Black churches back to back, all struggling, and we're trying to restore what was. That was a thriving African-American business district. And so if you dig deep enough in your history and see who was in your city back in the day, and how do you begin to restore what was, and the people that were here that may have been displaced. So so that's kind of my closing thoughts. It's really inspiring for me to hear about your father, Matthew. I really am grateful I got to be part of hearing that, because I think he and I have a similar heart, especially around some of this. But we need to be courageous and speak truth about our histories and speak truth about the need and not be shy. But that gives other people courage when we're strong. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you all tonight. It's been a joy. Thanks.
Thank you again, Jill and Jed. This was a great program. For all of you, both of these presentations are available in the agenda packet. So for those members who received the members only email, both of these presentations, along with everything associated with this meeting, is in the agenda packet. Before we leave, I will post that in the comments for folks who are not necessarily members, but that are interested in accessing those presentations. So I'm going to transition to the less fun part of the evening, our business meeting. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight,
Thanks, Eric.